I think I've met most of you, but I'm Monty Gilliard, and I chair the Creation Care Committee here at Trinity. The Creation Care Committee is very pleased to be hosting a presentation by Dr. Mariah Whitehead. The mission of the Creation Care Committee is to foster a greater awareness and appreciation of all of God's creation by nurturing and maintaining the landscape around Trinity, as well as provide programs that educate and inspire good environmental practices. This morning, I believe you will be inspired, as I have been, by the work and dedication of our speaker, Mariah Whitehead. Dr. Drew Lanham, ornithologist, writer, and poet, has described Mariah as, quote, a rare bird. Dr. Lanham was her doctoral advisor at Clemson, and as he goes on to state, Mariah was, quote, one of those students who came to be mentored and ended up mentoring. He notes that, quote, her head and her heart worked in tandem to inform the task her hands had to do. I love that. Mariah was, and he goes on and says that became his mantra. That quote. Mariah describes herself as an inpatient scientist with a sinuous career. Mariah graduated from Davidson College, went to Australia as an intern for the School for Field Studies, which sparked an interest in birds. Back in the US, she received a master's degree in wildlife ecology and management from the University of Georgia. And in 2003, a doctorate in forest resources from Clemson, focusing on avian ecology. But Mariah believes her environmental education began at home, where she grew up on land in the back swamps of South Carolina, where her family has lived for over 200 years. The forested wetlands were her schoolhouse and her cathedral, full of lessons on flora and fauna and nurturing a deep, abiding reverence for the land. Through her avian research, Mariah realized what birds need and what a lot of our natural communities need is habitat protection. So Mariah shifted her career focus to land protection. I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Mariah at the Nature Conservancy. Oh, we had so much fun. I in philanthropy, Mariah in land protection, where she helped preserve over 22,000 acres of land in South Carolina over a decade. 8 years ago, Mariah spread her wings once more and joined the Open Space Institute, where she now serves as Vice President and Director of Land for the Southeast. Mariah guides the strategic direction of land conservation to realize OSI's mission of protecting scenic, natural, and historic landscapes and making parks and other protected land more welcoming for all. These park projects seek a new focus for conservation in the Southeast. In addition to habitat and cultural resource protection, the parks focus on rural economic opportunity, improving access to nature-based recreation in underserved communities, and mitigating the impacts of climate change. Today, Mariah will focus on how OSI is championing conservation in Western North Carolina. As Mariah said in one of her articles, quote, it's good for folks to know that everyone has a role to play in conservation. Welcome, Mariah, my dear friend. Thank you for being here today and sharing your knowledge. And thank you for the work you're doing on behalf of all of us and the creatures we love in the natural world. Oh, no.
Made me cry before I give a talk. Well, thank you guys for coming today. This is always so fun to have such a friendly, group to have a conversation with, and I would love for this to be just that, very conversational. So please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions as we go. And I know we'll have a little time at the end for questions as well. And I just commend you for having your creation care group and for you all who are all invested. I had two churches where I tried to start creation care groups, maybe in a moment before its time. I think this would have been in the early 2000s, and I just remember a lot of arguing about how hard it would be for people to bring their own coffee cups, so we didn't have to use styrofoam. Just a lot of obstacles to what seemed like really simple ideas.
If you can
All right,
stand
yes,
on this
so for
side of the
me to
table, then
advance.
people online can see you a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah,
And is this my clicker?
I think so, or maybe just
Or
use
maybe I'll just do that.
it.
That'll work.
Let's see.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go back to the very beginning, as Monty said, because I do think that probably you're here. I know I'm here talking about this because of the opportunities I had as a child to connect with the natural world. So maybe just raise your hand if you sort of attribute your affinity for the natural world to being able to be outside as a kid. I mean, I think almost all of us start that way. And what we know is that's sort of the outdoors kid is a little bit of an endangered species these days. And I think that being able to think full circle and holistically about how we create conservationists and stewards and the role you have to play of getting your kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews and neighbors' kids into the outdoors is a big part of the work we have to do. So my childhood heart was really divided between two places. Monty already mentioned the farm where I grew up in rural South Carolina, which is in the back swamps, but also called back swamp community. People would often say, is that really a place? You really grew up in a place called back swamp? And I did. I grew up a very rough and tumble kid with three brothers, the only daughter. We actually raised a great horned owl, which is, of course, not legal. But in the 70s, I don't think anyone was paying close attention to that. And Solomon the great horned owl, I think, had a huge impression on us. But the other part where my heart resided as a child was in our mountain retreats, where we would get to come both to the Black Mountain area, to Montreat. I grew up a Presbyterian, and also to the Highlands area, where my grandmother would be gifted a house to use for a few weeks out of the summer. And so those are the places that I feel that deep connection to, and that impulse to protect and preserve and steward into the future. The second lesson I learned along the way was this lesson of stewardship, that really the work of protecting the land does not end with the act of protecting it. There's so much we have to do with the care of these places once they're protected. And so, as Monty mentioned, I spent about a decade after college really outside researching birds, and that went from Australia to Hawaii, where I got to work with endangered bird species in Maui. And then right here, I came back to the Southern Apps to do my PhD research. And I learned a few lessons through that work. So I was working in this stronghold of conservation, the Pisgah and Nantahala National Forest, where we have contiguous protection and millions of acres of land. It's one of the greatest strongholds of conservation along the East Coast. But what we learned was we have a middle-aged forest. We had wholesale cut those forests about a century ago. And all that forest had come back, kind of in the same age class, and it had lost the diversity. We've lost our old growth. We've lost some of our younger forests that support early successional species. We have lost fire from that landscape. We have lost species from the loss of hemlock and chestnut. We had introduced invasive species. And so that stewardship of really thoughtful, continuous work, taking care of the land, even once it was protected, is hugely important and required another level of understanding of the land and what fosters diversity there. And my third lesson comes full circle. And so the themes I'll try to return to as we talk today is this idea of protect. We must protect these places. We must steward these places. We also have to allow people to connect to them. And connecting creates the third piece of that circle. Without connecting people to the natural world, we won't end up with the protection and the stewardship in the future. And one of my lessons as a mom and raising my family here in the mountains of Western North Carolina is that even without access to a family farm for my kids to grow up on, they've had access to the outdoors through our public protected land. I mean, as y'all know, you roll out of a bed in Brevard onto a trail. And we spend all of our time outdoors, hiking and exploring and finding swimming holes. And my kids have come to love that land and be connected to it the same way I'm connected to that swamp and that place where I grew up. And that is such a gift that we have access to that place of these public protected lands. And so that really has become my passion, is creating spaces that are accessible. And there's all sorts of things we can talk about accessibility to make things truly accessible. Does not stop with just saying this is now open to the public. So we'll talk a little more about that today. So I have a few Wendell quotes in here because he's a favorite. And one of these quotes is, "Nobody can discover the world for somebody else. Only when we discover it for ourselves does it become common ground and a common bond." So I want to touch on how the work of the Open Space Institute fits into that narrative of protect, steward, and connect. But I also want to say that conservation is a team sport. It absolutely requires an ecosystem of groups doing this work together for it to be successful. And I think we're really fortunate in conservation that it is such a collaborative community that we recognize our dependence on each other to get the work done. And so when I talk to people that are prospective volunteers or donors or just folks that want to engage in this work, I think it's really important to impart that. It takes all of us. Don't get caught up on who's the one group that might be able to do it all. Spread the love amongst the groups doing this work, because we are stronger together and we accomplish a lot more together, and there is a lot to be accomplished. So the Open Space Institute has been around for about 50 years. We're a regional land trust that works from Maine to Florida. The organization grew out of New York. We really got solid footing with an endowment from the Wallace family, from the Reader's Digest family, that allowed us to expand our geographic scope. The Southeast program has only been active for about 10 years and 11 now, and I've been there for 9 of them. So I've had the opportunity to see OSI kind of start to grow and thrive in the southeast. And I've lived in Brevard that whole time, but have been running the regional program where most of our work is happening in South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And I'm so thrilled after 13 years to really have a more focused area that encompasses Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. And it's been really exciting over about the past year and a half to launch the work in this geography. But just to hit on, Monty's already read our mission, but the focus of the themes that we work on include clean drinking water, places to play and do outdoors, home for wildlife and habitat protection, healthier communities, and resilience through conservation. And here's that circle that we've already talked about. Protect, connect, and steward, I think, are the 3 words that capture the essence of this work and what OSI hopes to accomplish. So I'm going to go back to a case study from South Carolina before I dive into all of the work we have underway in Western North Carolina. But I am going to keep an eye on the time so I don't go over. Monty, what time should I wrap for questions?
I don't know, maybe 10 till.
Okay, we can do that. So this is a project in coastal South Carolina that actually Monty and I sort of got to start working on this together when we were at the Nature Conservancy. And it's a project that a lot of groups have been involved in, but one that I've carried through my transition from TNC to OSI and been able to play a large role in the work in this place. And I think it represents an ideal for how to engage with communities when we do land protection. So the Black River in South Carolina is a true coastal plain river. It's black because of the hardwoods that line the river, and a sandy bottom essentially dyes the river like teeth with those deciduous leaves that fall every fall. This river spans about 5 counties, but this initiative is focused on the navigable portions of the river in Williamsburg and Georgetown County, South Carolina. And in my mind, this project represented a bit of a paradigm shift in what we're focused on between 20th century conservation and 21st century conservation. In the past, we talked a lot about wildlife habitat and scenic view sheds, maybe protecting cultural sites, creating recreation, and all those themes still apply. But as we matured into this work of conservation, we've gone deeper in thinking about how does this work meaningfully impact our communities, and how do we work with communities broadly to create new advocates for conservation, for folks to see the relevance of this sort of work to their lives and livelihood and their quality of life. And so the new themes of economic opportunity, equitable access, and even flood mitigation are now themes that and climate resilience are themes that we talk about a lot with our protection work. So this particular project involved a incredible natural landscape that had been left largely intact over the years, this forested landscape of the Black River watershed. But much of the land along the river was held in industrial forest ownership. It had been owned and managed by timber companies for over a century. And because of divestment and changeover in that timber industry, suddenly that land base that we had thought of as being sort of stable and secure as timberland was up for grabs. And we needed a steward to step in. We needed an entity or an agency that was willing to come in and secure that land base and ideally make it accessible for the people that live there, and maybe offer a new little glimpse of hope. And as we envisioned what this project could look like, we came up with this idea of a linear park along the river. There is a 70-mile section of river that the land was largely found along. And we went and sat down with someone that Becky knows well, a guy named Paul McCormick, who was the director of South Carolina State Parks and a really visionary guy, and actually took this map of South Carolina state parks and the donut hole where there was no state park, where the people that lived in Williamsburg County were going to have to drive an hour to go to the nearest state park. And we introduced this plan of a new state park. And Paul said yes on the spot, which was sort of astounding to me. The second thing we got to do, once we had the concept, was actually before we started the park, we started engaging with the community of Williamsburg and Georgetown counties. We developed a steering committee to guide the creation of the park, to help us think through what amenities we would like to see at that park. And we had natural leaders that stepped up from the community with excitement and then helped to engage concentric circles around them. And so a few things happened at this stage in the project. We had what you might call in building a community conservation project, a lot of participatory education. We had a lot of engagement with kids groups and community groups and getting people out on the river, sometimes for the first time, even though their family had lived in this place for generations. We had leaders. I'm going to go ahead and go here. We had leaders that emerged, like Mayor McCleary of the town of Andrews, who saw this as a source of economic opportunity for his small town that was really dwindling at that time. And Mayor McCleary loves to talk about how he was actually baptized in this river. And so this has been a full circle experience for him. He says he has harrowing memories of his baptism, but sees this as holy land and is so excited about the opportunity to connect his community to it. We had multiple small towns along the river that actually went through the process of rebranding their town with this concept of come see our town of Kingstree, visit the Black River, to actually create a destination that might draw people in, that might have someone planning a vacation to these areas. And these local leaders actually rose up to be the leaders of the initiative. The county supervisor, Tiffany Wright, Senator Sabb from Williamsburg County, and Mayor McCleary speaking beside Governor McMaster and others at an event in this photo. So that community engagement continued over the years as we developed this initiative. And so today, what that looks like, and the folks that work for OSI that are doing this deep on the ground work, is we have completed a cultural plant assessment where we actually went to the park sites. We now have 12 sites totaling over 7,000 acres acquired. And we've assessed the plants that are most important to the tribes and to the indigenous communities that have have ancestral land along the river. And we're working on a cultural use agreement where state parks will allow tribe members to come in and actually be able to use those plants and collect those plants. Because what we know in maintaining cultural identity, having access to things like culturally important plants is really important. And if you don't own the land, you lose that part of your culture. A second initiative that has sort of been spurred by the Black River work is so meaningful to me, and it's only through that process of deep listening and engagement that something like this would surface. But Erin Pate, who's our community engagement person on the ground, in meeting with folks and listening, there were three pillars that we often talked about with this project, and we've already mentioned them today: climate resilience, equitable access to the outdoors, and economic opportunity. Two of those were impacted by the fact that over 70% of the population growing up along this river had never had the opportunity to learn to swim. And how do we say this is a quality of life benefit to open this river up? And there are going to be all these opportunities to kayak guide or fish guide or do transport shuttles for folks that are going to come for the river trail that's being developed if folks can't safely engage with the water. And so Erin identified this as a key point in being able to say that the river is accessible, and connected the dots and worked with the local YMCA in both counties to create a swim safety program. And that launched this summer. And with that partnership, they created a portable pool. And this is what it just was mind blowing to me. They figured out how to take the pool to the kids. And all summer, they moved the pool from one camp to the next, and 500 kids got swim safety lessons this summer. The third, that economic opportunity and resilience, since Mayor McCleary engaged in this, he has taken his town through some visioning and created a new brand, and has now kind of linked the economic future of the town of Andrews to this Black River initiative. And it includes everything from a new brand for the town to them thinking about how they would like to do street improvements, how they can create resilience to flooding through planting, how they can create trails and greenways that connect the town directly through pedestrian marks to the new state park. And so a lot of the hope of that town is resting on this access to the outdoors. There is a video we were going to show, maybe we'll send it around. So let's switch to where we are today, the Appalachian chain. And one of the most important, from a biodiversity standpoint, interconnected systems like in the world, and certainly the most important one in the Eastern US. So OSI has to some degree focused our work from the north to the south along this Appalachian landscape. And we're doing that for many reasons. We work through several different programs, and so this is just a snapshot of OSI's projects up and down that Appalachian chain. We have a re-grant program where we take in foundation funding and we actually distribute it back out to other land trust groups and other conservation groups doing work on the ground. So that's one arm of OSI that has been very active in this landscape, even before our land program kind of entered in the past 2 years. And that's represented by the blue dots. We have a resilient communities program where we're engaging directly in with communities and doing resilience planning and thinking about how they can prepare for climate change, for floods, for heat. And those little stars are some of the communities where we've worked. All of those have been in Tennessee, but that's something we're excited to hopefully move into Western North Carolina as well. And then the little green triangles are our land projects, and there are actually quite a few more that are not on this map because this was from a year ago. Another focus when we think about our climate resilience, we think about climate mitigation, of how we actually have activities and strategies that are going to sequester more carbon. And we know that forests are a huge part of this, and how we manage our forests and how we protect our forests. And this is a snapshot just of forest carbon across the US. And you can kind of see that dark green that runs along the Appalachian spine. Probably not surprisingly, another thing we understand is for bird movement, and this is a spaghetti snapshot of bird migration across the US, and you can see that funnel that is the Southern Alps. So this heartbeat of a protected forest landscape converges with being a sink for a lot of carbon, but also a stronghold for biodiversity in the east. And when we pause and we think of the people of the Appalachians, of course, we think first of indigenous folks that were here, and the fact that we have many communities still with strong ties to this landscape, and including that voice in our work is essential, and finding opportunities to reconnect our indigenous communities with the land is a priority of OSI and many others. And then we also know that the Appalachians are home to about 26 million people. About 14% of those people are living in poverty. In our rural areas, as we experienced with Helene, we have very self-determined, independent communities that have been here a long time. And engaging those communities in this work and creating examples of how conservation is part of the answer, is a solution that's meaningful to people's lives, is also part of that work. So the other thing we know is that this region, the Southern Alps, is the East Coast playground. I mean, folks are traveling from all over. Millions of people come to recreate and play in this region. And how do we use that tourism to not overwhelm the land, to ensure that people have access to it, but also to ensure that it's stewarded despite kind of that demand on the resource. So this goes along with the themes we've been talking about today, but some of this evolving work that OSI is focused on in the Appalachian landscape includes elevating community voices with that focus on climate resilience, really engaging communities in how they can address climate locally, policy of increasing and aligning funding and incentives for forest conservation as a climate solution, and actually accelerating the pace of conservation for the highest priority lands in the apps. And so this is a more recent snapshot of some of the work that OSI has underway just in the Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee region. And at this point, we have a growing pipeline of projects that really have felt the urgency of the task of protecting land in this region. The demand is real, and I'm sure y'all have all sort of seen it and experienced the growth and demand, and particularly the second home community that's been coming to the Western North Carolina region. And part of that probably climate related as well. We have the goal of taking our lessons learned and working closely with the communities in Eastern Tennessee, and where we host community gatherings. We sit down and we talk about what folks are experiencing that is likely related to climate impacts. Maybe we don't call it climate impacts, we call it repetitive flooding. We have great science that we can bring to the table to help with planning and a thoughtful response, and to bring solutions that really come from the ground up, that come from listening and engaging with folks. And so our staff person that works in our department called Conservation and Innovation, Joel Hauser, is in Chattanooga and has just been doing transformational work in this regard. We're so excited to move that work into Western North Carolina as well. And so after Hurricane Helene last year, we started hosting listening sessions with our land trust partners and really talking with our land trust about how do we as a land protection community really meaningfully engage and help with the recovery effort. How do we bring natural solutions through restoration, land protection, thoughtful planning to the table? We have some of the technical capabilities that our small towns might not have. We have experts in GIS and planning. We have experts in acquiring land, and so we've had some deep conversations with many of our land trust groups, and we identified some opportunities of helping with buyouts, of doing floodplain restoration with native plants, of doing community resilience planning. These are all skill sets that we have and can bring to our towns. And so OSI identified the opportunity to actually seek a grant. We're still waiting to hear from the Dogwood Health Trust that would allow us to assemble, we hope eventually up to $1 million to then re-grant out to land trust local community partnerships. So our ideal for this project is to actually see a local land trust pairing up with a small town or community that has a real need and can use a natural solution as a way of responding and recovering in the wake of Helene. We foresee these being about $100,000 grants, so it's meaningful enough amount of money for those entities to work together to share resources and to really respond in a way that's going to build more resilience and maybe even create more natural spaces for people to enjoy. And so protect, connect, and steward. So what's next for OSI in the Southern Apps? We hope to launch that Community Resilience Fund for Western North Carolina in 2026. We have many land protection projects underway. Almost all of them are in partnership with a local land trust. We're trying to bring the technical capability of writing the really complicated grants, of figuring out really very complicated land transactions, but to bring in our local land trust partner who has a deep understanding of the context of that community and help with the stewardship of these places on the ground makes for a perfect marriage for getting some of these transactions done. So we have over 7,000 acres at some stage in development across multiple Western North Carolina counties. And one little project that I'm really excited about is OSI's Parks Department is engaged in its first Western North Carolina project. We completed our first direct acquisition in Western North Carolina in August, and it's an 800-acre tract in Transylvania County that juts into Pisgah National Forest and was extremely prime for development. It's only about 15 minutes from Nashville Airport and 15 minutes from Brevard, and surely would have gone another direction, but we were able to assemble the funds and secure the property. It's gonna go to the Wildlife Resource Commission. The property has 3 homes on it, and when we first started looking at it, I was like, gosh, how are we gonna deal with these homes? Because the Wildlife Resource Commission surely isn't gonna want them. And as it turns out, what they decided is having those homes on site is a perfect complement, because they have had such a hard time finding housing for their staff in Transylvania County. The cost of living is prohibitive for people that are working in their fisheries, their biologists, their law enforcement folks. And so they're actually going to have workforce housing on site, and such a perfect complement to address both those issues with one project. But we received a grant from an anonymous donor who is investing in the creation of trails named after women. And there was a matriarch to the family who really made the decision that they wanted to see this property go into conservation. And so Rosalind Morris, mom, is going to have a trail on this site that will be completed before we sell the property to the state and lead to a beautiful waterfall. It'll be very accessible. A short half-mile hike on even ground, and we're so excited to be able to bring our landscape architects and park staff in to create that trail while OSI. And that's all I had.